What's up, guys? So today we are going to discuss a potentially controversial topic that I really have not heard anybody bring up before, and that is whether type 1 diabetics are actually natural. So I made a poll on my Instagram stories. Part of the problem with having one question right after the other is that you're going to prime people for a certain answer. So one of the questions was, should people who take insulin, who are type 1 diabetic, be allowed to compete in natural federations? And I can post the actual direct quote here and what the poll was, with the second one being about the same question, but for testosterone. And the reality is, I think it would have been even more skewed towards people saying no for testosterone if they had not first been primed with that question on diabetics, right? So that can change it. But even then, even being primed with the question for diabetics, still there was a huge skew in the answer. So the question really becomes, if you are taking this hormone, this very anabolic hormone that is doctor prescribed that you need for a medical condition, is that still considered natural? Now, a lot of you probably saw the video that I had put up relating to what Menno Henselmans had said on the topic, and then we actually had him on for a podcast on the topic to really delve deeper into it. At the end of the day, I do believe that if you are on TRT, you probably should not be considered truly natural, and you should not be competing in natural organizations. Now, I've said many times, I don't care if somebody's on TRT. I think there are very legitimate reasons to go on TRT for a small subset of the population, certainly not as much as you see in the Instagram and bodybuilding world of people trying to justify their use or their small steroid cycles, but legitimate TRT is a real thing, of course, and I think there are uses for it, and I think there are certainly health benefits for it. Going throughout life, hypogonadal is absolutely going to be less healthy than supplementing with legitimate TRT to get you in the mid-normal or even upper normal range. But obviously then you have examples of people who are really abusing TRT, or they call it TRT, they're taking 200 milligrams a week. I actually just saw another person who I was surprised to see they were taking 200 milligrams per week as well. And this person was at least open about it, but the point is that is going to have you at very super physiological levels. So in any case, there's legitimate reasons for TRT. It's not something that I care if anybody does, but let's just call it like it is, right? I mean, it is absolutely different than being natural, especially as one diets down. However, a very similar argument could be made for diabetics, type 1 diabetics who need to take insulin. Now, the difference is they don't have a choice here, right? Even if you are hypogonadal, I think that would be ridiculous for somebody to do that if they actually are hypogonadal and not just because they dieted for months and months, but truly hypogonadal. That would be ridiculous to not actually use the medicine that we have available. But that is a much more rare circumstance. And the reality is that you could do that and still survive if that's what you want to do. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you need to take insulin, right? Period. So of course you don't really have a choice in the matter, but that does not change the fact that you are taking a very anabolic hormone that can be abused. And a lot of the same arguments could be made for that versus TRT. You could say, well, they only take as much as they need, and of course they don't want to be in that situation. And it's like, sure, but somebody who's legitimately on TRT also doesn't need to take more than just whatever they need. And I've said a few times, I have plenty of clients who are on TRT, or I've coached people who are on TRT in the past, and a lot of them only take the actual required dosage. And even if you look at the studies, the people who take 50 to 75 milligrams per week do not see an anabolic response unless they were starting really low. Look at studies of people who are eugonadal and they have normal testosterone levels, and then they take, again, 50 to even up to 100 milligrams of testosterone per week. They don't really see much of an increase in muscle mass. They see small increases in fat-free mass. Actually, those who are on 50 milligrams per week had a decrease in fat-free mass. But even if to like 100, you're seeing a small increase of fat-free mass, which could easily just be water weight. So you're really not seeing that much of an anabolic response until you're getting to some of these higher doses. So I'm just saying, if you're going to make that argument that these type 1 diabetics are not necessarily abusing it, you could make that exact same argument for TRT. Now, I would also say that the reality is none of these have a clear black and white answer, and I think it is probably a spectrum, right? Is insulin anabolic? Yes, absolutely. Is a moderately super physiological amount of insulin going to have as anabolic response as testosterone? Probably not. But I will say that I have had a couple of friends who were diabetic who then got heavily into resistance training and then kind of abused it. They took more than they needed, and they saw an increase in growth response. And I don't want to get people watching this video to then start going out trying to use insulin, because it is one of the few things in the recreational bodybuilding drugs that can actually kill you quickly, right? I mean, it's not a very common thing, but you can absolutely die if you overdose on insulin. So I definitely do not recommend people go out and try it. I'm just saying that I do know type 1 diabetics who have used that to their advantage. And you could also make the same argument when it comes to dieting down. You could say that, well, most naturals, they're going to have to eat fewer and fewer carbs. But if a diabetic were to have their insulin a little bit higher, they could maintain a higher level of insulin, of course, during their dieting period. Then again, of course, if they were to really abuse it, they would go hypoglycemic. So I'm not in any way trying to say that this is some hack, some secret that they're all using and that, quote unquote naturals could then use to be a lot bigger. I'm just bringing up the fact that it's an interesting point that I haven't heard anybody else really bring up, even though I know people who have personally used it to their advantage. So this is more of a discussion topic. I'd actually be very interested to hear what you guys think in the comment section, why you think there was such a discrepancy between the polls. Again, if I'm really kind of showing my cards, do I think it's exactly the same? No, I don't. But I do think it's interesting that you could have that. You could have people who don't produce much growth hormone. And this was one of the problems that I brought up with Menno's argument, was like, look, if you're just trying to even the playing field, so to speak, you could get into a lot more than just testosterone. To use that argument of, hey, if I just use testosterone, I'm going to even the playing field. Well, where does that stop? Should you take a little bit of growth hormone? Should you take a little bit of insulin? There are going to be some people who have higher levels of myostatin, right? So should you take a myostatin inhibitor? Eventually, it gets kind of crazy to try to even the playing field, because you can never even the playing field because of the huge variation in genetics. So I'd like to know what you guys think about this topic. Do you think that a type 1 diabetic taking insulin, maybe even more insulin than they really need, should they be considered natural? Does that matter? Should they be allowed in natural competitions? What if you are not a type 1 diabetic and you then take insulin? Are you now not considered a natural either? And where is that cutoff line? Are there other substances that people who consider themselves natural take just because it's not a banned substance, but really it probably means that they're not natural? So I'd love to hear what you guys think below. Comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.